Another Lumion Legacy HTUC video, and today's video is on a Lumion suggested by a viewer, and this is Stratusoar. One of my least favorite Lumions, but then again, Stratusoar is one of the best Lumions in the entire game, and I think a lot of people will agree with that, thanks to what utility it has, the versatility, and basically everything that it has is really great. This video is on how to use and counter Stratusoar, from sets to weaknesses and resistances to offensive and defensive teammates to counters and checks. This is the video that you need to know on how to use and counter Stratusoar. So before we actually get into the video, we must ask the question, what role does Stratusoar play? Well, thankfully this question is pretty easy to answer when you look at its base stats. The main thing you should be looking at is its melee attack. Well, you're never going to use any melee attacks because your range attack is a lot more higher, so yeah. It does have some good HP, energy, and melee defense. While you might give the argument that its melee defense is pretty low, what Stratusoar can do when melee defensive is actually pretty great, so this melee defense is not all that low. Its HP stat does make up for it, which is pretty good as well. Its energy stat of 80 is pretty great because it does get it to 250 energy at level 50 battles, which is great for any Lumion, so that's pretty great as well. But the main things that you should be looking at is its range attack and range defense. Now I did forget the speed stat, but its speed stat is decently high. It does outspeed stuff like Valkyrie, Ikazune, Borok as well, and so you should take that into account. And it has really high range attack and range defense. While it's not the highest in the game, this balance of base stats in Stratusoar's favor is actually pretty great because it does play in its role, which I'll be talking about later. So what role does Stratusoar play? Well, thankfully this question is pretty much answered by now. The role that Stratusoar plays is a solid defenses to tank from both sides. It can be your mixed tank, or you can invest all into range defense, which is pretty good as well. You can try investing in melee defense as well, and thanks to Stratusoar's typing, which I'll be talking about later, it does decently well against some melee attackers. And it also has enough damage to threaten other Lumions, which is pretty good as well. What I'm talking about is Stratusoar also does get setup, which is amazing for Stratusoar, and honestly I kind of envy it, but whatever. It can be solid in defenses, it can still threaten opponents with damage, which is a common theme amongst the top tier walls. So yeah, with that out of the way, I'll be talking about Stratusoar's resistances and weaknesses, so let's get along with that. Stratusoar's defensive typing of air plus metal is not really the worst thing in the world. It's actually really great, but its offensive typing is not really as great because its offensive typing is pretty much walled by any electric type, but its major resistance, or major weakness actually, is electric types. Mainly Joltooth, Zulong, Elephage, Metatoad are great switch-ins on a Stratusoar, which is pretty bad for it. But it only has one other weakness too, and that's fire types. Mainly Pyrolin and Chartiki are stuff you should watch out for, and while you do have Jetstream, you still get hit super effectively by them, and Pyrolin might be running the Fanning Flame ability, so that is not really great. However, everything onwards is actually pretty positive, with 5 resistances to air, metal, ancient, bind, and typeless. Typeless types like Livercat, Trumbull, and mainly Taoshinu will be great switch-ins to switch in on and set up, which is pretty great. Mind types like Ferroglyph, Shachi, the Cosmere forms are pretty great mind types to switch in on. And ancient types, while there aren't as plenty as there was before, Obsidian is a really good ancient type to switch in on, and wall, which is pretty great. Metal types like Valkyrie, Tyrex, Serenite as well are some good switch-ins. Air types, mainly Wintrix and Zeppelin and Swirl and Snagoop, are some great air types to switch in on. So yeah, Stratusoar does well a lot, but it doesn't wall much else because it has one major resistance to bug and another immunity that I'll be talking about almost there. A bug type is pretty uncommon. Well, you mostly see Harvesect in competitive play and mostly the aforementioned Swolder and Deladrix. But yeah, after that, bug types are not as common, so you don't really need to worry about this major resistance. And its one immunity to Earth is actually pretty great because with Stratusoar's typing, you wall almost every Earth type that isn't a Thunderchomp set of Mars. So yeah, that is pretty great. So with that out of the way, I'll be talking about Stratusoar's sets, which is pretty interesting, so I'll get along with that. Stratusoar's set, which will be the first one, will be a ranged wall with the ability of Toxic Filter. This is basically your best ability and like only ability you should be actually using. So yeah, that is a thing. Toxic Filter is mainly here so you won't get poison stalled and you can absorb poison type moves, which is pretty great. I'm pretty sure it's only support poison type moves, so yeah, that is a thing to consider. And its 4 moves will actually be pretty simple. Metal Blast and Rejuvenate are your main moves, basically because Metal Blast is your best stab in terms of like hitting things offensively, and Rejuvenate is obviously great on any defensive Lumion because you want recovery obviously. Jetstream or Gust or Magnify or Tase will occupy your 3rd and 4th move slots. Gust is mainly here if you do not have any hazard remover, and Stratusoar is practically one of the better hazards against Gabademic, but other than that you would want any other hazard remover, so yeah, that's the thing to consider. And if you do not want to run Magnify, which I do not know why, you can run Tase. Tase is especially good while Electro types are prime switch-ins for you. You could try running Tase to do some damage and some other stuff, provide utility. So yeah, I would personally run Jetstream and Magnify, so yeah. And the personality of choice will be very clever, frail, sluggish. This is mainly so we can tank a lot of range attacking hits, mainly from stuff like Valkyrie, Ferroglyph, Shachi, Casimir Cracked, and some other stuff as well. And frail and sluggish is basically the stuff you want to decrease because we're not going to be using speed as much. We still outspeed most of the walls in the game already with sluggish, which is pretty good, and melee attack we're not using any of that, so yeah. The item of choice will be the heavy shields. You do actually have enough energy to use heavy items pretty consistently, so yeah, and you also want to high that ranged attack, or rather ranged defense even more. And the TPs of choice will actually be pretty simple. 20 energy at level 50 battles does let you use 1 Rejuvenate, 2 Magnifies, and 2 Metal Blasts with the heavy shield, so yeah, that is pretty great. And 200 HP and 200 range defense are pretty much self-explanatory, and the leftover 80 TPs can be put anywhere. I just wouldn't put it in speed, but while you can put it in speed, I just wouldn't do that. I would rather prioritize bulk, so yeah. Another set for Stratusoar is pretty fun, which is a set of frail armor set, and unlike Colossotrops, it doesn't need the frail armor buff to actually be pretty great. So yeah, the moves of choice this time will be a more offensive set, and while I did say this is a set of frail armor set, it is especially ranged bulky still, so you can try running Tase or some other stuff, but I wouldn't do it honestly. It's just not worth it. Jetstream, Metal Blast, Magnify are your main 3 moves because Magnify is your best setup move and your other 2 moves are Stab, so yeah. And the last 4th move slot can be occupied by Rejuvenate or Energy Surge. Energy Surge is mainly here if you just want to hit stuff neutrally as well, but I would prefer Rejuvenate since this Stratusoar is still ranged bulky and it does have some defensive utility. The personality choice will be Clever Nimble. Clever is to make sure you have enough bulk to set up because you need all the setup you can get with that offensive typing, and Nimble is pretty good as well, so you can outspeed a lot of stuff before you get the frail armor buff. And the item of choice will be a Flame Pearl or Iridescence, which I'll be talking about later. Iridescence is mainly here so we can deal as much of the damage with Jetstream. You can of course have a metal essence as well, I just put air essence here. And the TPs, this HP and range defense spread does let you live not let you live, but it lets a Pyrelin do at the maximum 50% health with a very smart flame shell. So yeah, you can live that hit, and then after that you'll still have the flame pearl, so you pretty much wall Pyrelin at that point, which is pretty good, unless the Pyrelin is obviously a Fanic Flame. And energy is mainly here, so well, this is actually pretty the same. Since we're not running any heavy items, 84 energy lets us get to 250 at level 50 battles, which is pretty good. 144 speed is so we can outspeed a very nimble Zulong at +1, so that is pretty great. And 200 range defense is pretty much so we can maximize our range bulk. And the last 72 leftover TPs are just here if you do not want to invest more into HP and you want to invest more into the defense or the range attack. If I were me, I would put it in the range attack, but of course you can put these TPs all into HP, so that's pretty great. So with that out of the way, I'll be talking about Stratusoar's counters and checks and teammates, so let's get along with that. So Stratusoar's main counter is Iliguana. I do not think there's any other better answer, so yeah, Iliguana is mainly here because it's an electric type. It pretty much walls Stratusoar to an oblivion, and if Stratusoar is, I think, smart and has Magnify boosted, I do not think it gets a 2-hit KO against an Iliguana, so yeah, that's pretty comfortable. Iliguana is an electric type, it has Energize as well, so it can set up along Stratusoar, so that's good. So yeah, but some other options is Setamars and Seer Knight. There is Malmork that I forgot to put on here, but I just think that these guys are better. Seer Knight is mainly here for the fire weakness, mainly because Seer Knight does have Flaming Kick, but other than that, it does get 3-hit KO'd if you are running Brawny Clever. So yeah, that's a thing to consider. But Setamars here is generally good because, well, it's good against most range attackers, and because of its hasty ability and Thunder Chomp, it's being able to hit a lot harder and probably one-shot the Stratusoar if the Stratusoar is in melee invested. Some offensive checks to Stratusoar is pretty simple. Mainly electric types is the name of the game. Joltooth and Metatoad are pretty good for it. Joltooth is mainly here because while its ambush ability is admittedly pretty great, and Metatoad here is because, well, Metatoad is pretty great for any team just because of its defenses and its powerful moveset. But other than that, you can run other stuff like Elephage and Zulong. Elephage is mainly here because it's an electric type, and Zulong does get 3-hit KO'd by a Metal Blast, so that's a thing to consider. These guys aren't mainly for switching in, they're mostly here for switching in once or revenge killing the next turn. And Pyrelin is going to be your last option. Since it has Fanic Flame, it's going to be able to switch in on jet streams a lot more, and then using Stratusoar as setup bait to set up its own damage and break stuff, so that's pretty great. So yeah, with that out of the way, I'll be talking about Stratusoar's offensive and defensive teammates. Stratusoar's main offensive teammates is Hunter, Metatoad, and C.B.O. C.B.O is mainly here because it has a pretty good matchup against all of Stratusoar's defensive counters or checks, which is pretty good. And Metatoad is mainly here because it does pretty well against Iliguana and Seer Knight if it does get the switch in on a Seer Knight, but it doesn't do as much well against a Setamars, so yeah. And Hunter is generally good for any team because its offensive coverage is just really good, and Zulong is also a good option as well. I just didn't put it on here, so yeah. And some defensive teammates is Barblast and Tyrex. Like Stratusoar, Tyrex, Barblast is pretty much the best defensive core in my opinion in the OU metagame. It pretty much takes in account for every single Lumion in the metagame other than a few exceptions like Pyrelin and some other stuff, so that's pretty good as well. And some other Lumions you can run because Stratusoar is so versatile. Chartiki, Obsidian, Tundulin, and some other stuff that I haven't put on here is pretty good with Stratusoar because of the many resistances it offers. So yeah, with that out of the way, I'll be talking about the conclusion and my closing statements on Stratusoar. So yeah, let's get along with that. So yeah, this is the end of the video. Overall, Stratusoar is a pretty versatile Lumion. It does a lot of damage, it tanks a lot of stuff, it can be your mixed wall, your ranged wall, it can outspeed a lot of stuff as well. Overall, Stratusoar is pretty much the definition of a good Lumion. Should I advise you of using this thing? Of course, Stratusoar is a really good Lumion. I would hate you for using it because I hate this thing so much, but then again, it doesn't matter what I think, Stratusoar is still a really good Lumion. So yeah, with that out of the way, like the video if you enjoyed and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. I make other HTUCs and planning to do some other style of videos like analyzing the meta, answering different questions, stuff like that. So yeah, this is Cotton Stoops, and remember that Zulong is still a dumpster fire.